Hey there, and welcome back to Botanic Haven. If you're new here, this is your cozy corner of the internet where we talk all things gardening, plant care, and creating those beautiful green spaces, both inside your home and out in your yard. I'm so glad you stopped by today because I want to share something that honestly changed my entire relationship with growing food at home. You know that feeling when you discover something so simple, so effective, that you wonder why you didn't try it years ago? That's exactly what happened to me when I decided to plant something on my windowsill that literally never stopped producing food. I'm talking about a plant that kept giving and giving, week after week, month after month. And it required so little effort that even my most skeptical friends became converts. It all started on a pretty ordinary Tuesday morning about 2 years ago. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at my windowsill, which at the time was just holding a sad little succulent and a collection of random coffee mugs. I'd been buying fresh herbs from the grocery store every single week, spending probably $10 to $15 on basil, cilantro, and green onions, only to watch half of them wilt in my fridge before I could use them. It was wasteful, expensive, and honestly frustrating. I remember thinking there had to be a better way. I lived in an apartment with no balcony and definitely no yard, so a full vegetable garden seemed completely out of reach. But that windowsill, that south-facing windowsill that got gorgeous sunlight for about 6 to 8 hours a day, well, that was prime real estate I'd been totally ignoring. So I did what anyone does these days when they want to learn something new. I started researching, watching videos, reading blog posts, and talking to my neighbour Oliver, who'd been growing tomatoes on his balcony for years. What I discovered completely blew my mind. There were so many edible plants that could actually thrive on a windowsill, producing food continuously for months or even years with the right care. The key was choosing plants naturally suited to container growing that didn't need tons of root space and had this amazing ability to keep producing new growth after you harvested from them. Now, I'm going to be completely honest with you. My first attempt was green onions, also called scallions, and it was almost embarrassingly easy. I saved the white root ends from a bunch I'd bought at the store, stuck them in a glass of water on my windowsill, and within days they started sprouting bright green shoots. After about a week, I transferred them to a small pot with some basic potting soil, and they just took off. Every time I needed green onions for a recipe, I'd snip off what I needed from the top, leaving about an inch or two of growth, and within a week, they'd grown back. It was like magic, and it got me completely hooked on the idea of windowsill gardening. But green onions were just the beginning. Once I saw how well they did, I wanted to expand my little windowsill farm. Basil immediately came to mind because I was going through a serious pasta phase, and fresh basil makes such a difference. I picked up a small basil plant from the local nursery. Nothing fancy, just basic sweet basil. The woman there told me the secret to keeping basil productive was to harvest it regularly and never let it flower because once it flowers, the plant puts all its energy into making seeds instead of growing more leaves. She said to pinch off the top sets of leaves frequently, right above where 2 leaves meet the stem, and this would encourage the plant to bush out and become fuller. I followed her advice religiously, and within a month, my single small basil plant had transformed into this gorgeous bushy herb that I was harvesting from twice a week. I'd make pesto, toss fresh leaves into salads, top my pizzas with it, and steep it in water for a refreshing drink. The plant never seemed to mind how much I took from it. In fact, it seemed to grow faster and healthier the more I harvested. I learned that this principle applies to so many edible plants. This idea that regular harvesting actually encourages more growth. If this guide has helped you, write 1 in the comments, and if not, write 0. This way I'll know which tips are most useful for your garden. I really do read through the comments and love hearing what's working for you all. After my success with green onions and basil, I got bolder and decided to try cherry tomatoes. I know what you're thinking. Tomatoes on a windowsill. But there are incredible dwarf varieties specifically bred for container growing and indoor conditions that can genuinely produce fruit on a sunny windowsill. I ordered seeds for a variety called Tiny Tim, which grows to only about 12 to 18 inches tall and produces adorable little cherry tomatoes that are sweet and delicious. Starting tomatoes from seed was a new adventure. I planted them in small starter pots, kept the soil consistently moist, and placed them in the warmest, sunniest spot on my windowsill. Within about a week, I saw the first tiny green sprouts, and I felt like a proud parent. Once they developed their first true leaves, I transplanted them into larger pots, about 8 inches deep, with good drainage holes. The tomato plants grew steadily, and I learned they needed consistent moisture, regular feeding with diluted liquid fertilizer every 2 weeks, and hand pollination since they were indoors. I used a small paintbrush to transfer pollen from flower to flower, which only took a minute or two but made all the difference. The day I harvested my first tiny tomato from that windowsill plant is a day I won't forget. It was perfectly ripe, about the size of a large marble, and it was the most flavorful tomato I'd ever tasted. There's something about growing your own food that makes it taste infinitely better than anything from a store. That one little plant produced tomatoes for about 6 months straight, giving me 2 or 3 ripe fruits every week. Around this time, my friend Daisy came over and saw my windowsill garden in action. She was amazed and immediately wanted to know how she could do the same thing. I helped her set up her first container with a mix of lettuce varieties. We used a shallow, wide container, only about 4 to 6 inches deep, scattered the seeds across the surface, and covered them lightly. Within a week, her container looked like a fuzzy green carpet as hundreds of tiny lettuce seedlings emerged. By week 4, she was harvesting fresh salad greens every single day using the cut and come again method, where you snip off outer leaves as you need them, and the plant keeps producing new growth from the center. Daisy told me later that having that little container of greens by her window actually motivated her to eat healthier, because seeing it there reminded her to make a salad instead of ordering takeout. That's one of the unexpected benefits of windowsill gardening. It changes your relationship with food because you become more connected to where your ingredients come from. I kept expanding my collection with cilantro, parsley, and chives. Cilantro has a reputation for bolting quickly, so I learned to keep it cool, harvest frequently, and succession plant new seeds every few weeks, so I always had young plants ready. Parsley grows slowly from seed, but once established, it's incredibly productive and will keep growing for months. Chives are virtually indestructible. You can cut them down to about an inch above the soil, and they'll grow right back within a couple of weeks. I harvested from my chive plant at least once a week for over a year, without it ever slowing down. One of the most exciting additions was microgreens, which are baby versions of vegetables and herbs that you harvest when they're just a couple of inches tall. They're incredibly nutrient-dense and go from seed to harvest in just 7 to 14 days. I started with radish, broccoli, and mustard microgreens in a shallow tray. Within a week and a half, I had gorgeous, vibrant microgreens that transformed my salads from ordinary to gourmet. The beauty of microgreens is that you can keep succession planting them, starting a new tray every week, which means you have a continuous supply of fresh greens. Now, let me be honest about the challenges. One of the first issues I encountered was aphids on my basil plant. These tiny insects can multiply quickly, but I solved the problem with a simple soap spray. Just a few drops of mild dish soap mixed with water in a spray bottle. I sprayed the affected plants every few days, and within 2 weeks, the aphids were gone. Another common mistake is overwatering. I learned to check soil moisture by sticking my finger about an inch deep into the soil. If it feels dry, I water. If it's still moist, I wait. Light is crucial for success. My south-facing windowsill got the most light, so that's where I kept sun-loving plants like tomatoes and basil. My north-facing window got less direct light, so I grew lettuce, spinach, and parsley there. I eventually invested in a small LED grow light for winter months, which was a game changer for keeping my garden productive year-round. My neighbour Oliver shared valuable tips about soil quality. He explained that because container plants have limited root space, the quality of your potting mix makes a huge difference. He recommended mixing basic potting soil with compost and perlite in roughly equal parts. This gave me a mix that was rich in nutrients, had good drainage, and a nice texture. My plants responded incredibly well to this custom mix. My friend Rose wanted to grow ingredients specifically for her morning smoothies. She started with spinach and a dwarf kale variety called Dwarf Blue Curled. Both grew beautifully on her windowsill, and she'd harvest a handful of leaves every few days for her blender. She said the taste was noticeably better than store-bought greens, and she loved the convenience of snipping leaves right before using them. This brings me to an important point about productivity. It's easy to underestimate how much food you can actually grow in a small space. I regularly gave away herbs to friends because I had more than I could use. My basil plants produced so much that I started making big batches of pesto and freezing it in ice cube trays for winter. Each cube was about a tablespoon, perfect for tossing into pasta or spreading on bread. Mint deserves special mention as another never-stop-producing plant. It's so vigorous that most gardeners recommend keeping it in containers where it won't take over your garden. I grew peppermint, spearmint, and chocolate mint, harvesting regularly for teas, mojitos, and savory dishes. Mint also roots incredibly easily in water. Just stick a cutting in a glass, wait for roots to develop, and plant it in soil. One unexpected benefit of windowsill gardening was the positive impact on my mental health. There's something deeply satisfying about caring for living things, watching them grow, and harvesting food you nurtured yourself. On stressful days, I'd find myself standing at my windowsill, checking on plants and trimming dead leaves, and these simple acts were incredibly calming. I also started noticing significant savings on groceries. A packet of basil seeds costs maybe $2 or $3 and gives you dozens of plants that produce for months. Compare that to buying fresh basil at the store for $3 to $5 a package that lasts maybe a week. But beyond financial savings, there's something priceless about the quality and freshness. When you harvest and eat within minutes, the flavor is at its absolute peak. I've experimented with unusual edibles too. Lemon balm, a member of the mint family, produces prolifically and makes fantastic calming tea. I even grew ginger root from grocery store pieces. Just plant them in a wide, shallow pot and green shoots emerge within weeks. You can harvest the young shoots for stir-fries and eventually harvest the roots for fresh ginger. The key to continuous production is succession planting, staggering your planting time so you always have something coming into production. I'd plant a new tray of microgreens every 2 weeks, so I always had fresh greens at various stages. This same principle works with lettuce, herbs, and any fast-growing crop. I want to emphasize that this isn't about one magical plant, but rather a system and collection of plants that together create continuous harvest. My windowsill garden now includes green onions that regrow endlessly, basil I harvest from multiple times weekly, succession-planted lettuce, tomatoes that fruit for months, perennial herbs like parsley and chives, and microgreens that go from seed to harvest in under 2 weeks. Each plant contributes to overall abundance, and because they have different growth rates and harvest times, there's always something ready to pick. If you're thinking about starting your own windowsill garden, my advice is to just start. Don't wait for the perfect setup. Pick one easy plant, maybe green onions or basil, get it growing, and learn as you go. Start small, pay attention to what your plants are telling you, and gradually expand as you get more confident. Before you know it, you'll be harvesting fresh food regularly, and you'll wonder why you didn't start sooner. The beauty of windowsill gardening is that it's accessible to anyone, regardless of experience level, space constraints, or budget. You just need a sunny window, some basic containers and soil, seeds or starter plants, and a willingness to learn. Trust me, once you taste that first tomato or harvest that first bunch of basil you grew yourself, you'll be hooked, and your windowsill will never stop producing food. One thing I discovered after about a year of windowsill gardening was the importance of rotating your crops and refreshing the soil periodically. Even with regular fertilizing, container soil eventually becomes compacted and depleted of nutrients, especially with heavy feeders like tomatoes. I started making it a habit to completely change out the soil in my containers every 6 months or so, which gave my plants a fresh start and kept them vigorous. The old soil didn't go to waste either. I'd spread it in my neighbours' outdoor garden beds where it could continue to break down and contribute nutrients to the larger ecosystem. This practice of soil rotation became almost meditative for me, a chance to assess each plant, prune away any dead or damaged growth, and give everything a thorough cleaning. I'd wipe down the containers, check for any signs of pests or disease, and sometimes even upgrade plants to slightly larger pots if they'd outgrown their current homes. Another game-changing discovery was learning about companion planting. Even in the limited space of a windowsill, certain plants actually grow better when they're near each other because they either repel pests that bother the other plant or they have complementary nutrient needs that don't compete with each other. For example, I started growing basil right next to my tomato plants. not just because they taste great together in recipes, but because basil actually helps repel aphids and other pests that commonly attack tomatoes. I also discovered that planting chives near other herbs helped keep fungal diseases at bay, because chives have natural antifungal properties. My friend Ivy, who's a master gardener, taught me that marigolds are incredible companion plants for edibles, and while they're not something you'd typically eat, their strong scent deters all sorts of common pests. I started keeping a small pot of dwarf marigolds on my windowsill as a natural pest control system, and I noticed an immediate decrease in problems with aphids and whiteflies. The community aspect of windowsill gardening has been another beautiful surprise. Once people found out what I was doing, I became the go-to person for questions about indoor growing, and I loved sharing my knowledge and seeds with others. I started saving seeds from my best-performing plants, like my cherry tomatoes and herbs that had bolted and gone to seed, and I'd package them up in little envelopes to give to friends and neighbours. There's something special about passing along seeds that came from plants you grew yourself, knowing that those seeds carry the genetics of plants that thrived in your specific conditions. I even organised a small seed swap in my apartment building where people would bring seeds or cuttings to trade with each other. It was amazing to see how excited everyone got about trying new varieties and sharing tips about what worked and what didn't. We'd meet up every few months, compare notes on our windowsill gardens, taste each other's harvests, and support each other through the inevitable failures and setbacks that come with gardening. I've also learned to embrace seasonality and work with it rather than fighting against it. While I can keep some crops going year-round with the help of grow lights, I've found that certain plants just perform better at specific times of year, and there's wisdom in respecting those natural rhythms. In the cooler months, I focus on lettuce, spinach, and cool-season herbs like cilantro and parsley, which actually prefer those conditions and produce beautifully without bolting. When summer comes around, I transition to heat-loving plants like basil, tomatoes, and peppers, which thrive in the warm air and abundant sunlight. This seasonal rotation not only gives my windowsill variety throughout the year, but also prevents me from burning out by trying to force plants to grow in conditions they're not suited for. I keep a simple journal where I note what I planted, when, how well it performed, and what I'd do differently next time. Looking back through that journal has been incredibly valuable because I can see patterns and learn from my experiences rather than making the same mistakes repeatedly. Perhaps the most profound lesson I've learned from this whole journey is about patience and the slower pace of growth. We live in such an instant gratification world where we can order anything online and have it delivered the next day, but growing food teaches you that good things truly do take time. You can't rush a tomato to ripen or force lettuce to grow faster than it naturally wants to. There's something deeply grounding about accepting this slower rhythm and finding joy in the daily small changes, rather than only celebrating the final harvest. I've learned to appreciate the beauty of a newly emerged seedling, the satisfaction of seeing healthy new growth after pruning, and even the problem-solving challenge of diagnosing what's wrong when a plant isn't thriving. This patience has spilled over into other areas of my life too, making me more mindful and less frantic about results. When I'm stressed or overwhelmed, I'll take a few minutes to just stand at my windowsill, observe my plants, maybe water them or pinch off a few leaves for dinner, and I always feel calmer and more centered afterward. The final thing I want to share is how this simple act of growing food on a windowsill has connected me to something much larger than myself. Every time I plant a seed, I'm participating in a practice that humans have been doing for thousands of years, nurturing plants to feed ourselves and our communities. There's a deep ancestral wisdom in understanding how to work with soil, water, light, and living organisms to produce food, and tapping into that feels both humbling and empowering. In our modern world, where most of us are so disconnected from where our food comes from, taking even this small step towards self-sufficiency creates a profound shift in perspective. You start to understand the work and care that goes into feeding people. You develop gratitude for farmers and gardeners who do this on a larger scale, and you become more conscious about food waste and sustainability. When I'm stressed or overwhelmed, I'll take a few minutes to just stand at my windowsill, observe my plants, maybe water them or pinch off a few leaves for dinner, and I always feel calmer and more centered afterward. The final thing I want to share is how this simple act of growing food on a windowsill has connected me to something much larger than myself. Every time I plant a seed, I'm participating in a practice that humans have been doing for thousands of years, nurturing plants to feed ourselves and our communities. There's a deep ancestral wisdom in understanding how to work with soil, water, light, and living organisms to produce food, and tapping into that feels both humbling and empowering. In our modern world where most of us are so disconnected from where our food comes from, taking even this small step towards self-sufficiency creates a profound shift in perspective. You start to understand the work and care that goes into feeding people. You develop gratitude for farmers and gardeners who do this on a larger scale, and you become more conscious about food waste and sustainability. My windowsill garden is tiny in the grand scheme of things, but it's my personal contribution to a more sustainable way of living, and it's sparked conversations with countless people who've been inspired to start their own gardens, whether on windowsills, balconies, or in their yards. The ripple effect of one person growing food and sharing that knowledge with others is more powerful than we often realize, and I'm grateful to be part of that movement toward reconnecting with the earth and with our food.